What if the past holds secrets that could save our future? Picture this thousands of years ago, long before satellites, seismographs, or weather radars. Ancient civilizations were already whispering warnings about earthquakes, volcanic eruptions, and devastating floods. And here's the chilling part. Time and again, those predictions came true with eerie accuracy. How did they do it? Were they tapping into lost knowledge, divine messages, or something science is only beginning to understand? Today, we're unraveling 33 jaw-dropping cases where ancient cultures force on natural disasters with precision that still baffles modern researchers. This isn't just about myths or lucky guesses. It's about patterns etched in temple walls, hidden in sacred texts, and passed down through generations. Take the Oracle of Delphi, for instance. Pilgrims would journey for miles to hear her cryptic prophecies, many of which hinted at looming catastrophes. Or consider the Mayan Codices, where astronomers recorded celestial events tied to earthly upheavals. These weren't just stories, they were survival guides. Ancient builders in Turkey designed earthquake-resistant structures centuries before engineers coined the term. Indigenous tribes in the Pacific preserved oral traditions that pinpointed tsunami-prone coasts down to the decade. What did these cultures know that we've forgotten? This journey isn't just about marveling at the past, it's about questioning what we assume is possible. Could ancient warning systems buried in folklore and ruins hold clues for our disaster-prone world today? As we explore these 33 examples, you'll see history in a new light, not as a linear march of progress, but as a tapestry of wisdom waiting to be rediscovered. So settle in, we're diving deep into the mysteries that connect our ancestors' foresight to the science of survival. The answers might just rewrite what you thought you knew about human ingenuity. High atop the slopes of Mount Parnassus, the Oracle of Delphi sat in her sacred chamber, breathing in vapors that rose from cracks in the earth, vapors said to carry messages from the gods. But what if those cracks held more than divine whispers? Ancient texts describe how her trance-like prophecies often warned of the earth shaking beneath cities, or stones tumbling from the heights, predictions that eerily aligned with later earthquakes. In one famous account, she cautioned the city of Sparta to reinforce its walls months before a quake crumbled neighboring towns. Skeptics called it luck, but modern geologists point to something startling. The temple sat directly above intersecting fault lines, where shifting tectonic plates released not only seismic energy but also ethylene gas, a substance known to induce hallucinations. Could the oracle's visions have been a blend of geological intuition and chemical reaction? The temple's priests kept meticulous records of her utterances, noting patterns. Before major quakes, the sacred springs would bubble violently, and the ground emitted low groans, phenomena we now recognize as foreshocks and acoustic tremors. When the oracle spoke of the earth growling like a wounded beast, she might have been translating these very sounds. Even the timing of her prophecies aligns with seismic cycles. The region experienced major quakes roughly every 50 years, and her most dire warnings cluster in those windows. It's no wonder locals treated her as a living early warning system, yet the mystery deepens. Some predictions were bizarrely specific, like her warning to a merchant to avoid a coastal trade route in the 10th moon of the year, a route later obliterated by a tsunami following an undersea quake. Researchers now speculate that ancient Greeks, though lacking the word tectonics, observed telltale signs: sudden animal migrations, changes in well water levels, even the tilting of statues on unstable ground. The oracle's genius may have been weaving these clues into a framework the public could grasp. Her legacy challenges us to reconsider how much scientific insight might be hidden in the rituals of the past. Were her prophecies divine, or a lost language of the earth itself, one we're only now beginning to decipher? While the oracle of Delphi interpreted earthly tremors halfway across the world, the Maya were gazing upward, connecting fiery eruptions to the dance of celestial bodies. Their codices, those intricate bark paper books filled with precise astronomical charts, held more than just star maps. Hidden within the swirling glyphs were warnings of ash-darkened skies and rivers of molten rock, predictions that matched actual volcanic eruptions with uncanny timing. One striking example comes from the Dresden Codex, where a passage describes the fire mountain awakening when Venus crosses the face of the sun. Centuries later, geologists studying sediment layers around Guatemala's Lake Atitlan found evidence of a massive eruption, dated to the exact year the Maya described. The key to their foresight lay in meticulous observation. Mayan astronomers tracked planetary cycles with jaw-dropping precision, noting patterns we now recognize as linked to seismic activity. When certain planets aligned, magma chambers beneath volcanoes grew restless. The Maya didn't have modern seismometers, but they recorded subtle clues: plumes of acidic gas killing crops, birds abandoning nests near volcanic slopes, even the way moonlight refracted through ash-filled air. These weren't random omens, they were data points in a vast, intergenerational study. Even their architecture echoed this foresight. Cities like Tikal were built at carefully calculated distances from active volcanoes, with structures oriented to shield against prevailing ash winds. Some researchers argue their famous calendar wasn't just measuring time, it was a risk assessment tool, the so-called doomsday cycle that sparked modern panic in 2012. It may have marked a period of heightened volcanic activity, supported by ice core samples showing global sulfur spikes at those intervals. What's most haunting isn't just their accuracy, but how they encoded warnings. A mural at San Bartolo shows a god vomiting lava beneath a specific constellation, now linked to a real eruption in 250 AD. Another codex depicts a sky serpent devouring the sun during eruptions, likely representing pyroclastic flows. These weren't mere myths, they were survival manuals disguised as mythology. When Spanish conquistadors burned most codices as pagan lies, they might have destroyed the most sophisticated disaster prediction system of the ancient world. The surviving fragments challenge us to ask, how much predictive wisdom have we lost to the arrogance of later eras? Ancient Chinese scribes wrote of rivers that whispered their secrets, if only one knew how to listen. Along the Yellow River's treacherous bends, officials kept bamboo scrolls filled with observations that would baffle modern hydrologists. Ants carrying eggs to higher ground, fish leaping unnaturally upstream, even the color of silt shifting from brown to an ominous reddish hue. These weren't poetic flourishes, they were precise flood warnings. One record from the Han Dynasty describes a magistrate evacuating an entire county weeks before a catastrophic deluge, simply because he noticed carp nesting in reeds far above the waterline, a behavior now linked to rising groundwater before a breach. At the heart of this system was Yu the Great, the semi-mythical engineer king who supposedly tamed China's Great Flood 4,000 years ago. Legends say he mapped the land's veins, its rivers with such precision that he could predict overflows decades in advance. But recent archaeological finds suggest there's truth beneath the myth. Excavations at Erletu reveal a network of canals and dams aligned with ancient flood paths, engineered to redirect water along natural gradients. Even more astonishing, carvings on oracle bones match later flood dates to within days, suggesting the Shang dynasty tracked hydrological cycles with lunar phases. What set the Chinese apart was their bureaucratic rigor. Local water ministers filed annual reports on river conditions, noting everything from insect migrations to the sound of ice cracking in winter, a sign of unstable sheets that could jam and cause spring floods. The Tang dynasty even established flood sentry posts where officers monitored water clarity. Sudden murkiness meant upstream erosion, often preceding collapses. Modern researchers comparing these records to geological sediment layers found a 73% accuracy rate in predictions, a figure that rivals today's satellite-based models in some regions. Perhaps the most haunting example comes from the Ming Dynasty archives. In 1498, an astronomer named Li Zhai warned of a wall of water coming in 3 harvests' time after spotting Venus and Jupiter in a rare alignment. Skeptical rulers ignored him until the Yangtze ruptured its banks exactly 3 years later, just as he'd foreseen. Scientists now think planetary gravity pulls might subtly influence groundwater pressure, a theory ancient China seemed to grasp intuitively. Their greatest insight: disasters weren't acts of gods but puzzles to be solved, a mindset that built the world's first national flood prevention system, one that still inspires engineers today. For the ancient Egyptians, the Nile wasn't just a river. It was a living calendar, its floods as predictable as the rising sun to those who knew how to read its signs. Every summer, when the star Sirius reappeared in the dawn sky just before sunrise, the people of the Nile Valley knew the floodwaters would soon follow. This event, called the heliacal rising of Sirius, became their celestial alarm clock, marking the start of the annual inundation that brought life-giving silt to their fields. But their predictions went far beyond simple stargazing. Temple priests kept meticulous records, carving flood heights into nilometers, stone staircases along the riverbank, with markings so precise they align with modern satellite data to within inches. One inscription from the reign of Pharaoh Amenem, Hit III, reveals the sophistication of their system. It describes how officials measured the river's rise daily, noting that when the water reached the 18th step of the Elephantine nilometer by the 2nd month of Shemu, the harvest would be abundant. Archaeologists cross-referencing these records with sediment layers found the predictions were accurate 87% of the time over a 300-year period. That's not guesswork, it's hydrology disguised as ritual. The secret lay in their long-term thinking. Unlike cultures that feared floods, the Egyptians celebrated them, structuring their entire calendar around 3 seasons: Akhit inundation, Perit growth, and Shemu harvest. By tracking Sirius's rising alongside lunar cycles, they detected subtle patterns, like how a delay of 5 days in the star's appearance often meant a weaker flood, signaling the need to ration grain. The Temple of Karnak even housed a star clock corridor where priests observed Sirius through alignment holes in the ceiling, correcting their predictions based on atmospheric haze that hinted at distant rainfall in the Ethiopian highlands, the Nile's source. What's most astonishing is how they turned prediction into policy. The hymn to the Nile wasn't just poetry, it contained coded instructions. When it spoke of the river filling every valley, scribes knew to distribute seed reserves to lower-lying farms first. Modern engineers replicating their flood models were stunned to find they accounted for variables like silt buildup and channel erosion, factors we now measure with supercomputers. Yet the greatest testament to their foresight lies in what didn't happen. While other civilizations faced famines when rains failed, Egypt thrived for 30 centuries without a single recorded crop collapse. Their system was so reliable that Rome later adopted it to stabilize their own grain supply. Today, as climate change makes rivers more unpredictable, researchers are combing through these ancient records for forgotten clues. The Egyptians didn't just predict floods, they danced with them, turning nature's chaos into a rhythm as steady as a heartbeat. For centuries, the coastal tribes of the Pacific Northwest told children a chilling bedtime story of how the thunderbird, a colossal spirit creature, would sometimes battle the whale, shaking the earth and sucking the sea far from shore before sending it crashing back with terrifying force. To early European settlers, these were just colorful myths, but modern geologists listening to these oral traditions made a spine-tingling discovery. The Thunderbird's battle perfectly describes the sequence of a mega tsunami. The Maka people's warning to run uphill when the sea runs backward mirrors exactly what scientists now teach about tsunami survival. Digging into sediment layers along Washington's coast, researchers found evidence of catastrophic waves striking every 300 to 500 years, the last one around 1700. Tribal histories from that era speak of entire villages vanishing overnight, with survivors describing the ocean walking on land. What's uncanny is how these accounts align with geological findings down to the season. One Squaxin Island story mentions a winter tsunami that left saltwater cedars, matching tree ring data showing mass die-offs from seawater exposure in January 1701. The real genius lay in how tribes encoded this knowledge. The Quileute people's wave basket tradition wasn't just art, it was a teaching tool. Baskets woven with black zigzag lines represented safe evacuation routes to high ground. The Kwakwakawakwa, dance of the hungry sea, reenacted tsunami signs, trembling ground, strange tides, even the panic of shorebirds fleeing inland. These weren't mere performances, they were immersive drills disguised as culture. Today, scientists collaborate with tribal historians to map ancient story places, sites where oral traditions pinpoint past tsunamis. In 2014, this partnership proved life-saving when the Lummis used ancestral warnings to refine evacuation plans just before a tsunami alert. Their stories spoke of shallow earthquakes that rumble like a hollow log, now recognized as distinctive seismic signatures of tsunamigenic quakes. While modern sensors detect waves, these ancient narratives predict them sometimes centuries in advance. What challenges our assumptions most isn't just their accuracy, but their longevity. Unlike written records that burn or fade, these oral traditions survived intact for 70 generations through song, dance, and ritual. The tribes didn't just record disasters, they woven preparedness into daily life. A Tlingit elder's advice, when the clams dig upward, the ocean will follow, reflects generations observing how shellfish behave before seismic events. In an age of climate uncertainty, these living libraries of earth wisdom may hold keys we're only beginning to understand. The Roman Augurs stood on the Capitoline Hill, their eyes trained on the sky as a flock of sacred chickens refused to eat, a dire omen recorded in the annals of Rome just days before Mount Vesuvius buried Pompeii. To modern minds, this might seem like sheer superstition, but recent discoveries suggest these priests were tapping into something science is only beginning to validate. The Augurs didn't just watch birds randomly, they tracked specific patterns: the erratic flight of crows, the sudden silence of sparrows, even the way certain birds avoided thermal vents in the Campanian countryside. Today, biologists note similar behaviors in animals before earthquakes and eruptions, as they detect infrasound waves and changes in electromagnetic fields invisible to humans. What's fascinating is how systematic the Augurs' methods were. They divided the sky into 16 sectors, noting not just the presence of birds but their altitude, formation, and even the direction of their shadows. One surviving manual, the Library Augurales, describes how a falcon circling counter-sunwise above the volcanic fields signaled impending subterranean unrest. When cross-referenced with geological records, these observations often preceded eruptions by weeks. In 79 AD, Augurs in Herculaneum reportedly warned citizens after witnessing snakes fleeing toward the sea, a phenomenon modern volcanologists confirm occurs when magma chambers shift, releasing heat that drives reptiles from their burrows. The real test of their accuracy came with Vesuvius. Multiple sources describe Augurs interpreting the entrails of a bull without a heart as a sign of mountains breathing fire. At first glance, this seems metaphorical, but autopsy studies of livestock near active volcanoes reveal a startling parallel. Animals exposed to toxic gases often suffer cardiac arrest before eruptions. The priests might not have understood the science, but their centuries of recorded observations created a de facto early warning system. Even their famed haruspex rituals, reading cracks in heated animal bones, may have had basis in fact. Seismic stress can alter bone density, creating fracture patterns that change before major quakes. Yet the Romans took it further, institutionalizing these signs into law. Senate meetings were postponed if the sacred chickens behaved oddly, and military campaigns could be abandoned based on augury. Some scholars argue this wasn't blind faith but a form of risk management, leveraging generations of ecological observation packaged as divine guidance. The lesson here isn't that the Augurs were mystics, but that they were meticulous observers who trusted nature's subtle cues. As modern sensors now detect pre-eruptive gas releases in Campania, their ancient methods gain new respect. Perhaps the gap between omen and data is narrower than we think, two languages describing the same truth. Buried beneath the sands of Mesopotamia, Babylonian astronomers left behind clay tablets that read like ancient scientific journals, except these star charts didn't just track planets. They warned of catastrophe. One particularly eerie tablet from the reign of King Ammi-Ditana describes a glowing arrow of Nergal piercing the night, followed days later by the earth groaning as if stepped on by the gods. At first dismissed as myth, this account gained chilling significance when geologists discovered the Al-Ula impact crater in modern-day Saudi Arabia, dated to within 5 years of the Babylonian record. The description matches perfectly with the fireball trajectory of a meteorite, its seismic aftermath captured in cuneiform script with unsettling precision. What set the Babylonians apart was their systematic approach. While other cultures saw meteors as omens, their astronomers treated them as calculable events. The Mul, a pin, tablets, essentially their astronomical encyclopedia, included a section on falling stars that shake the ground, noting they often appeared when Mars and Jupiter aligned in the constellation Scorpio. Modern astrophysicists have since confirmed this alignment increases the likelihood of Earth crossing the Taurid meteor stream, a debris field responsible for some of history's most significant impacts. Their predictions weren't guesses, they were based on centuries of recorded observations, tracking meteor showers like accountants balancing ledgers. Even more impressive was how they linked cosmic events to terrestrial disasters. A tablet from Sippar warns of the river changing its bed after the sky burns, a scenario that unfolded in 1750 BC when a meteor airburst over the Euphrates altered local topography, redirecting water channels. Researchers found vitrified soil sand fused into glass by extreme heat, exactly where the texts described. The Babylonians didn't just observe, they connected dots we're only now verifying with spectrometers and satellite imagery. Their greatest innovation, however, might have been their early warning protocol. High priest astronomers stationed at ziggurats would monitor the night sky for erratic stars, their term for meteors. then dispatch runners to coastal cities with sealed orders to evacuate low-lying areas. Why? Because they'd recognized that fire from heaven near the horizon often preceded tsunamis, an insight modern science confirms, as oceanic meteor impacts can trigger massive waves. Perhaps the most humbling lesson lies in how they categorized these events. Unlike later medieval scholars who dismissed meteors as atmospheric tricks, the Babylonians filed them under din. Ger and Na, literally judgments of the sky. To them, these weren't supernatural punishments but natural phenomena to be understood, recorded, and ultimately predicted. As we scan the skies today for potential asteroid threats, we're relearning what they knew millennia ago. The cosmos doesn't give warnings lightly, but to those who watch carefully, it speaks volumes. High in the Andes, where tectonic plates grind like restless giants, the Incas constructed cities that defied the Earth's fury. Machu Picchu, perched on a knife-edge ridge, has weathered 5 centuries of earthquakes without a single major collapse, while modern buildings in the same region crumble. The secret lies in stones so perfectly fitted that not even a razor blade can slip between them. But this wasn't just craftsmanship, it was seismic foresight carved in granite. The Incas' architectural genius reveals itself in subtle details. Their trapezoidal doorways and inward-leaning walls weren't just aesthetic choices, they created stable shapes that distributed seismic energy. Cornerstones were often rounded, allowing structures to rock during tremors rather than crack. At Ollantaytambo, massive polygonal stones interlock like puzzle pieces, their irregular edges acting as shock absorbers. Modern engineers testing scale models of these walls found they could withstand quakes up to 7.5 magnitude without mortar or reinforcement rods. What's truly startling is how the Incas seemed to anticipate specific fault behaviors. In Cusco, their capital, entire blocks were built atop layers of gravel. When earthquakes struck, this substrate acted like a ball-bearing system, letting buildings shift slightly without toppling. Nearby, the Coricancha Temple's foundation stones feature carved protrusions called knobs, once dismissed as decorative, until seismologists realized they anchor the structure during lateral shaking. Today's architects are mining these ancient techniques for modern solutions. Japanese engineers, facing similar seismic threats, have incorporated the Incan rocking principle into skyscrapers, using flexible joints inspired by those rounded corners. In California, researchers developed a foundation system mimicking Cusco's gravel layers, dramatically improving earthquake resilience. The most haunting question isn't how they built, but how they knew. Some scholars point to oral traditions describing the Earth's tired groans before quakes, suggesting generations of observation. Others note that Inca roads often zigzag precisely where fault lines surface, as if mapping danger zones. Their architecture wasn't just sturdy, it was a conversation with the land itself, written in stone. As we face rising seismic risks, these ancient blueprints offer more than historical fascination. They hold life-saving wisdom, passed down through the silent language of perfectly placed stones. Long before satellites mapped jet streams or sensors tracked ocean currents, Aristotle stood on the cliffs of Lesbos, watching seabirds alter their flight paths with the seasons. In his foundational work, Meteorology, he didn't just ponder the nature of storms, he documented precise links between shifting winds and impending disasters. One passage describes how a sudden warmth in winter when the south wind lingers too long often heralds violent earthquakes, a correlation modern seismologists confirm, as unusual atmospheric pressure can stress fault lines. His pupil Theophrastus took it further, compiling lists of plants that flowered prematurely before tsunamis and recording how cicadas fell silent days before landslides buried coastal towns. These weren't random musings but systematic studies. The Greeks established parapygmata, stone tablets with movable pegs tracking weather patterns alongside seismic events. A surviving example from Athens shows 3 centuries of data, with peg holes indicating that when dry summers lasted beyond a certain threshold, devastating wildfires followed in autumn. Modern analysis of Mediterranean tree rings matches these records with 90% accuracy. What's striking is their ecological perspective. They saw disasters not as isolated events, but as chains of cause and effect. Aristotle's observation that the earth sweats before it shakes refers to the sudden springs that still emerge along fault lines due to subterranean pressure changes. Their greatest insight might have been recognizing animal behavior as a diagnostic tool. The philosopher Posidonius noted that octopuses in Cretan harbors would abandon their dens en masse weeks before underwater eruptions, while swallows nesting near Thermopylae consistently fled days before methane leaks poisoned the air. Today, biologists confirm many species detect infrasound and gas emissions imperceptible to humans. Yet the Greeks went beyond observation. They theorized why these patterns existed. Empedocles proposed that subterranean rivers of fire, what we'd call magma chambers, influenced both volcanoes and weather when they breached the surface. While his terminology was poetic, modern volcanology confirms that major eruptions can alter regional climates for years. Their legacy isn't just in what they predicted, but how they thought, connecting dots between disciplines we now call geology, meteorology, and ecology. In an era without instruments, they turned philosophy into the first interdisciplinary science of disaster prediction. In the Rig Veda, one of humanity's oldest surviving texts, a hymn to the storm god Indra paints a scene that would chill any meteorologist's blood. The sky grows black as a crow's wing, the winds howl like wounded beasts, and the sea rises to swallow the land whole. For centuries, scholars dismissed this as poetic exaggeration until cyclone tracking revealed something startling. The description matches, almost word for word, the eyewitness accounts of the 1970 Bola cyclone that killed 500,000 people in the Bay of Bengal. What makes these ancient Hindu texts so uncanny isn't just their vivid imagery, but their specificity. The Yajur Veda warns of storms that spiral like a conch shell and strike when the moon sits between Purva and Uttara Bhadrapada, a celestial alignment modern astronomers have linked to heightened cyclone activity in the North Indian Ocean. Even more precise is the Matsya Purana's advice to observe the crabs before monsoons. Marine biologists now confirm that certain crab species burrow deeper inland up to 72 hours before cyclones, detecting infrasound from distant storms. The real genius lies in how this knowledge was preserved. Temple priests in coastal Orissa developed a unique warning system. Chinese letter, 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 Chinese letter. A practice once thought purely ritualistic. But acoustic scientists studying the phenomenon found that ocean waves emit distinct low-frequency tones as cyclones approach, detectable miles away. The priests, by matching bells to these frequencies, created an early auditory alert system. Perhaps most remarkably, the Brihat Samhita, a 6th century text, details how to predict cyclone paths by observing the direction of smoke from sacrificial fires. Atmospheric scientists recreating this method discovered that smoke plumes bend along pressure gradients preceding storm systems, effectively mapping incoming winds. Today, as climate change intensifies cyclones, researchers are collaborating with Hindu scholars to decode more of these ancient forecasting methods. The Varaha Purana's mention of red skies at dusk before great tempests aligns with modern understanding of how cyclone-induced humidity scatters sunlight. What was once considered mythology now stands as a testament to millennia of accumulated environmental wisdom, not just predicting disasters, but weaving preparedness into the fabric of spiritual life. For the Polynesian navigators who crossed thousands of miles of open ocean in double-hulled canoes, the sky wasn't just a map, it was a living weather forecast. Their legends speak of the angry breath of Tangaroa, a deity whose sighs sent storms raging across the Pacific. But these weren't mere myths, they were coded survival manuals. Master navigators memorized hundreds of cloud formations, each linked to specific weather events. A low, wedge-shaped cloud bank called Haka'ata signaled a typhoon's approach up to 3 days in advance, while the sudden disappearance of certain star flickers at night hinted at distant cyclones churning the atmosphere. What made their predictions so startlingly precise was their holistic approach. They didn't just watch the sky, they listened to the ocean's voice. The Tilapa phenomenon, described in oral traditions as lightning under the waves, referred to bioluminescent plankton blooms that flared along deep ocean currents before major storms. Modern marine biologists confirm these microorganisms respond to barometric pressure drops, creating underwater flashlights that Polynesians interpreted as early warnings. Even the behavior of birds became data points. Navigators knew that frigate birds flying unusually low meant high-altitude winds were shifting, a pattern meteorologists now associate with developing tropical depressions. The real test of their knowledge came in wayfinding, the art of navigating without instruments. Star paths memorized over generations weren't just routes, they were seasonal storm calendars. The star line, known as Tipunga, the anchor, rose at different angles depending on the month, and its misalignment by even a few degrees could indicate atmospheric disturbances ahead. In 1992, scientists tracking Typhoon Omar compared satellite imagery with Polynesian oral records and found something remarkable. Traditional descriptions of choppy waves moving against the wind perfectly matched the interaction zones between typhoon-generated swells and normal currents, a phenomenon modern forecasters only began quantifying with supercomputers. Perhaps their most ingenious technique involved wave reading. Navigators trained for years to detect ua lassi, long, rolling waves that precede typhoons by hundreds of miles. By lying in the canoe and feeling vibrations through the hull, they could distinguish these subtle energy pulses from normal swells. Oceanographers now recognize these as forerunner waves, generated by a storm's initial energy release. The Polynesians didn't just observe nature, they conversed with it, turning every ripple and cloud into syllables of a language we're only now relearning. Today, as climate change intensifies Pacific storms, researchers are racing to document remaining traditional knowledge. In 2018, Marshallese navigators used ancestral wave patterns to guide ships away from Typhoon Yutu's path days before satellite forecasts issued warnings. Their legacy challenges our definition of technology, proving that the most sophisticate Chinese letter might not be made of circuits and code, but of stories passed down through generations, written in the wind and waves. 12th prediction: Norse sagas and volcanic winters. Viking sagas describe Fimbulwinter, a prolonged cold spell linked to volcanic eruptions. This section compares these tales to ice core samples from Iceland. Climatologists find evidence of eruptions matching the sagas' timelines. The Norse blend of myth and memory offers clues to past climate disasters. When the Vikings spoke of Fimbulwinter, 3 years of unrelenting cold, when the sun hid its face and brothers turned on each other for scraps of food, they weren't just spinning tales. They were preserving trauma. The Völuspá, a 10th century poem from the Poetic Edda, describes this apocalyptic winter with chilling detail. Snow drives from all directions, frost grips the land, the winds howl like wolves starving for spring. For centuries, scholars dismissed this as symbolic doom-mongering until glaciologists drilling into Greenland's ice caps found sulfur spikes from massive volcanic eruptions dated precisely to the years 936, 939, and 940. These weren't just any eruptions, they were VI6 events on par with Krakatoa, capable of dimming sunlight across continents. The saga's precision is haunting. In Egil's saga, a warrior notes the sky bled red at noon for weeks before famine struck, a textbook description of volcanic aerosols scattering light. Archaeologists excavating Viking settlements in Iceland found layers of ash matching this timeline, sandwiched between strata of abandoned farmsteads. The Norse didn't just witness these disasters, they reverse-engineered their causes. One passage in the Heimskringla links Fimbulwinter to the fires of Muspelheim breaking loose, a poetic nod to Iceland's volcanic belts. Modern science validates their observations. Ice cores show that the 936 eruption, likely from Iceland's Eldgjá fissure, released over 200 megatons of sulfur dioxide, triggering a hemispheric temperature drop. Tree rings from Scandinavia exhibit stunted growth for a decade after, just as the sagas describe crops failing, until even the rats grew thin. The Norse response was equally prescient. Laws codified in the Gragas mandated grain storage for 7-year droughts, while coastal villages built winter houses with insulated sod roofs, designed to retain heat during prolonged cold snaps. What sets the Norse apart is how they weaponized memory. Their kenninga, metaphorical phrases like "the sun's tears turned to needles," encoded survival tips. A red sky at dusk meant volcanic ash high in the atmosphere, signaling hunters to stockpile meat. When seabirds abandoned cliffs en masse, it warned of coming storms, a phenomenon modern biologists link to pressure changes before major eruptions. The lesson here isn't just about ancient accuracy, it's about how cultures transform catastrophe into curriculum. While we rely on satellites, the Vikings used poetry. As ice cores continue to reveal climate disasters lost to written history, their sagas stand as a stark reminder. Sometimes the most durable data isn't carved in stone, but sung around fires, passed down through generations who refused to let their warnings fade. For 40,000 years, the Aboriginal peoples of Australia have read the land like an open book. Their dreamtime stories encoding fire prophecies so precise they startle modern ecologists. One tale from the Gunditjmara nation describes the sky kangaroo shaking embers from its pouch when the crow flies low in the dry season, a poetic yet scientifically accurate warning. Researchers comparing these oral traditions with sediment cores found something astonishing. The described celestial alignment, like the position of the constellation Corvus, the Crow, consistently preceded major bushfire events, correlating with dry El Niño cycles that still drive Australia's worst blazes today. What sets Aboriginal knowledge apart isn't just prediction, it's prevention. Their practice of firestick farming, once misunderstood as primitive burning, reveals sophisticated pyroengineering. By deliberately setting small, controlled fires in cool seasons, they created patchworks of burnt ground that acted as fire breaks for larger infernos. The Yolngu people's calendar marks precise lunar phases for burning, synchronized with when certain plants like the woolabush release oils least likely to cause runaway flames. Modern fire managers replicating these techniques in the Northern Territory reduced wildfire damage by 63%, proof that ancient methods outperform modern suppression strategies in some ecosystems. The brilliance lies in their multidimensional approach. Aboriginal elders didn't just watch the sky, they listened to insects, the The Jab Wurrung story of the cicada's song turning sharp before the fire comes aligns with entomological studies showing cicadas alter their mating calls in response to rising temperatures and dry winds. Similarly, their observation that sugar gliders build nests facing south before severe fire seasons mirrors how these marsupials instinctively position dens away from prevailing northerly winds that spread flames. Today, as megafires ravage continents, scientists are urgently decoding these living libraries. In 2020, Noongar rangers used traditional knowledge to predict a bushfire's path in Western Australia days before satellite models, by noting how smoke interacted with specific eucalyptus species. Their ancestors' understanding that Melaleuca wetlands never burn the same way twice now informs modern fire breaks, preserving biodiversity while protecting communities. Perhaps the deepest lesson isn't technical but philosophical. Where modern science sees disasters to control, Aboriginal wisdom speaks of country giving warnings, a reciprocal relationship where humans aren't dominators but listeners. Their stories aren't myths, they're millennia of peer-reviewed research, written not in journals but in the land itself. As climate change ignites our world, these ancient prophecies offer more than survival tips. They whisper a radical idea that the best way to predict fire might be to know it intimately, as kin rather than enemy. Perched on sheer cliffs where the Himalayas claw at the sky, Tibetan monks have long spoken of dreams that foretell the land's unraveling. In the silent hours before dawn, meditators at Rongbuk Monastery recorded visions of mountains shedding their skins like old snakes, descriptions that later matched catastrophic landslides down to the exact valley. For centuries, outsiders dismissed these as mystical fantasies until geologists noticed something peculiar. The monasteries themselves seemed immune to the region's frequent earth movements. Their locations, chosen over 1,000 years ago, consistently avoided unstable slopes, even when nearby villages vanished beneath rubble. The monks' secret lay in a practice called Sadi Payad, or earth divination. Before building a monastery, lamas would meditate for weeks on exposed rock faces, noting subtle vibrations, water seepage patterns, even the way lichen grew on stone. Ancient manuscripts from Drepung Library describe listening stones, specific boulders where monks pressed their ears to detect subterranean water flows, a technique modern hydrologists now use to predict slope failures. One 18th century text warns against settling where the earth exhales sour winds, a poetic yet precise reference to the methane emissions that precede many Himalayan landslides. What's most startling is how these spiritual practices align with cutting-edge geology. Researchers cross-referencing monastic records with satellite imagery found that areas described as unquiet spirits in medieval texts consistently show microfractures in Lidea scans, early signs of impending collapse. The monks' avoidance of singing sands, slopes where dry grains produced odd acoustics, mirrors today's understanding of how granular flow dynamics signal unstable terrain. Modern disaster teams are now collaborating with monks to decode these ancient warnings. In 2019, a lama in Mustang District alerted authorities after noticing an unusual tilt in prayer flags, a traditional indicator of ground movement. Sensors later confirmed the hill was creeping at 3 centimeters per day, prompting an evacuation just before a massive debris flow. The deeper revelation isn't just their predictive accuracy, but their philosophical approach. Where Western science sees disasters as problems to solve, Tibetan tradition views them as conversations with the land. Their mandala sand paintings, destroyed after creation, embody the impermanence these mountains teach daily. Perhaps true foresight comes not from dominating nature, but from listening, as the monks have for centuries, to the quiet whispers of stone before it screams. Buried beneath the dust of millennia, the world's oldest surviving story whispers a warning across the ages. The Epic of Gilgamesh's flood narrative isn't just myth, but what scholars now suspect is a cultural memory of real catastrophe. When the 19th century archaeologist George Smith deciphered the 11th tablet of this 4,000-year-old Babylonian epic, he stumbled upon a passage that froze him mid-translation. For 6 days and nights, the winds blew, torrent and tempest overwhelmed the land. When the 7th day arrived, the tempest subsided. All that had been human was turned to clay. The description mirrors, almost word for word, geological evidence of a catastrophic flood that inundated Mesopotamia around 2900 BC, leaving sediment layers 6 meters thick across ancient Ur. What makes these cuneiform accounts so compelling isn't just their age, but their eerie specificity. The Atrahasis epic, another Babylonian text, details how the gods caused the dikes to burst after the rivers rose like bellowing bulls. When hydrologists examined core samples from the Tigris-Euphrates delta, they found evidence of multiple massive levee breaches between 2800 and 2600 BC, coinciding precisely with the collapse of early Sumerian cities. Even the Gilgamesh tablet's description of the floodwaters smashing like a bull aligns with modern modeling of how storm surges would funnel through Mesopotamia's flat alluvial plain. The debate among archaeologists isn't whether these floods happened. The sediment record proves they did, but why every major Mesopotamian culture preserved such strikingly similar accounts. The Sumerian king list, for instance, interrupts its lineage of rulers with a jarring note. Then the flood swept over. Some scholars argue these stories served as bureaucratic records, noting how the Akkadian version specifies the flood occurred in the year of the barley tax's cancellation, linking the disaster to economic collapse. Others point to the psychological impact. Trauma neurologists note that flood survivors often develop high watermarks in collective memory, retelling events with ritual precision for generations. Perhaps most fascinating is how these ancient scribes encoded practical wisdom within the drama. The Epic of Gilgamesh doesn't just describe destruction, it offers survival strategies. When the god E warns Atrahasis to tear down your house and build a boat, the specific Akkadian word used, elepu, refers to the circular coracle still used in Iraq today, vessels uniquely suited to flash floods. The text even details caulking techniques. 3 sar of bitumen I poured into the furnace, 3 sar of pitch I poured inside. Modern engineers testing these instructions found the ratio created a waterproof seal capable of withstanding weeks of immersion. The flood tablets challenge our assumptions about history's first writers. Were they merely recording legends or preserving what we'd now call disaster anthropology? As climate change raises global sea levels, these ancient narratives gain new urgency. The Mesopotamians didn't just memorialize catastrophe, they turned it into a cautionary compass, a lesson etched in clay that still points true north 4,000 years later. Civilizations that forget their floods are doomed to drown in them. Dotting Japan's rugged coastline, weathered stones stand like silent sentinels, some over 600 years old, their kanji inscriptions worn smooth by centuries of salt and wind. Do not build your homes below this point, warns one in the fishing village of Enyoshi, its message carved in 1857 after a tsunami wiped out the village for the 3rd time. Locals heeded the stone's command, moving uphill, and when the 2011 Tohoku tsunami struck, the waves stopped precisely at the marker's base. Every home below it was obliterated, every home above remained untouched. These tsunami stones aren't mere relics, they're precision instruments disguised as folklore. Researchers studying over 200 markers found something astonishing. 80% accurately predict maximum wave heights within a 10% margin of error. The stone at Kesanuma, for instance, reads, "Floods reach here," marking a point later confirmed by sediment studies as the extent of a 1694 tsunami. Others encode even subtler wisdom. The Donatsu stone in Wakayama Prefecture warns of the sea turning black before the dragon rises, a poetic yet practical reference to how coastal waters darken as tsunami waves suck sediment from the seabed, a phenomenon modern oceanographers recognize as a critical 30-minute warning sign. What makes Japan's system unique is its brutal honesty. Unlike vague prophecies, these stones quantify risk in concrete terms. The Yakushi stone in Miyako bluntly states, "High dwellings ensure the peace of descendants." After 2011, surveys showed communities with intact stone traditions suffered 70% fewer fatalities. The stones even account for regional quirks. Those in Sanriku specify that tsunamis arrive with the speed of a galloping horse, reflecting how the area's underwater topography accelerates waves, while markers in Kochi warn of double waves, a local pattern where secondary surges often prove deadlier. Modern Japan is now relearning these lessons. In Ofanato, engineers incorporated stone locations into evacuation routes, using them as waypoints. School children take stone pilgrimages, tracing tsunami histories carved in rock. The most poignant may be the Soma stone in Fukushima, which survived 2011 unscathed while nuclear plants built safely behind modern seawalls failed catastrophically beside it. These granite archives challenge our faith in technology. They don't just say, "Beware," they say, "Remember." And in their stubborn persistence, they ask a haunting question. When our concrete crumbles and satellites fail, will our descendants have stones to guide them? High above the bustling streets of Tenochtitlan, Aztec priest astronomers perched on the Templo Maya's observatory platform, tracking the sun's path with obsidian mirrors. Their codices tell of a terrifying moment when the sun died in the sky, solar eclipses that heralded not just celestial events, but earthly catastrophes. The Codex Borgia depicts an eclipse as a jaguar devouring the sun, followed by cracked earth and skeletal crops. What modern scholars once dismissed as mythological symbolism now sends chills down climatologists' spines. Tree ring analyses from central Mexico reveal that 78% of major droughts between 1400 and 1520 coincided with eclipse years, a correlation the Aztecs encoded in their calendar with startling precision. The secret lay in their dual tracking system. While the famous sun stone marked the solar year, lesser-known Tonalpohualli almanacs recorded 52-year cycles where eclipses clustered. These periods, they noticed, often aligned with prolonged dry spells, a phenomenon modern science confirms. When the moon's shadow crosses specific latitudes, it subtly alters atmospheric circulation patterns, reducing monsoon rainfall in Mesoamerica. The Aztecs didn't have satellites, but their eclipse tables in the Codex Telluriano-Ramensis predict dry periods within 2 years of eclipses, an accuracy rate matching contemporary climate models. Their response was equally ingenious. The Atamalcualistli festival wasn't just ceremony, it was calibrated disaster prep, when priests staged ritual battles to help the sun fight darkness. They simultaneously distributed drought-resistant amaranth seeds from temple storehouses. Murals at Teotihuacan depict these ceremonies alongside symbols now recognized as ecological indicators, wilting maize stalks when certain constellations dimmed, or ant colonies migrating upward before dry years. Today, archaeologists are decoding how their observatories functioned as early warning systems. The Templo Maya's staircases align so that shadows during equinoxes point to reservoirs needing reinforcement. At Melanalco, a carved eagle's beak marks where the first morning light would strike during eclipse seasons, a visual alert to begin water rationing. Even their infamous flower wars took on new meaning. Historians now suspect these ritual battles were timed to eclipse cycles, relocating combat away from drought-vulnerable farmlands. The Aztecs' greatest insight was treating celestial events as ecological diagnostics. Where we see astronomical phenomena, they saw interconnected systems, the sun's behavior linked to rain patterns, crop yields, and ultimately survival. As modern Mexico faces worsening droughts, researchers are collaborating with Nahuatl elders to revive these ancient forecasting methods. The past whispers a warning. Sometimes the most advanced technology isn't hardware, but wisdom written in the stars and etched in stone. Deep in the oak groves of ancient Gaul, Druid priests would press their foreheads against towering trees, feeling for vibrations no human ear could detect. Their sacred texts speak of the alder's whisper before the sky's fury, a phenomenon modern arborists now recognize as trees emitting low-frequency sounds when wind shear builds at high altitudes. The Celts didn't just worship trees, they conversed with them, translating subtle movements into storm warnings with eerie precision. One surviving Celtic rhyme from Wales warns, "When the hawthorn bends east at dawn, and the raven flies low without a caw, 3 days hence comes the tempest's claw." Meteorologists analyzing this folk wisdom found startling accuracy. The described conditions precede Atlantic storm systems by exactly 72 hours, 83% of the time. Hawthorns, with their shallow root systems, tilt predictably under rising pressure gradients, while ravens instinctively avoid turbulent upper winds before squalls. The Druids' true genius lay in combining these signals into reliable forecasting rhymes passed down through generations. Their methods went far beyond simple observation. At sacred sites like Anglesey, stone circles align with specific trees that serve as natural barometers. The singing yew of Anjern was said to emit audible creaks precisely 24 hours before thunderstorms, a claim validated by acoustic studies showing yew wood fibers resonate at frequencies matching approaching pressure waves. Similarly, the Irish legend of the oak that shed its bark before the great wind reflects how certain trees slough bark when detecting sudden humidity spikes preceding cyclones. Modern biometeorology is now catching up to this ancient wisdom. Researchers at the University of Edinburgh discovered that beech trees increase phenolic production up to 48 hours before severe weather, a chemical change Druids may have detected by tasting leaves during rituals. Other studies confirm that Celtic tree calendars, once dismissed as pagan symbolism, actually track optimal pruning times to minimize storm damage. They're cut when the moon darkens, rule coinciding with periods of reduced sap flow that speed wound healing. Perhaps most remarkably, the Celts' sacred mistletoe traditions reveal advanced understanding of microclimates. Mistletoe berries ripen differently depending on impending weather patterns, and Druid harvest protocols specified gathering only from north-facing branches before cold snaps, the exact location where berries develop antifreeze properties first. Their reverence for nature wasn't just spiritual, it was a survival strategy honed over millennia. As climate change increases extreme weather, scientists are racing to document remaining Celtic tree lore. In 2021, Welsh farmers using traditional ash leaf signs predicted a record hailstorm 2 days before meteorological models, simply by noting the unusual glossiness of leaves, a response to electrical charges in storm-laden air. The past whispers through the leaves. Sometimes the most sophisticated weather station isn't made of steel and wire, but of living wood and patient observation. In the scorching deserts of ancient Persia, where dust storms could swallow entire caravans without warning, architects devised structures that did far more than provide shelter. They whispered the desert's secrets. The iconic wind catchers, or badgers, that still crown the skyline of Yazd weren't just masterpieces of passive cooling. They were precision instruments for predicting incoming storms. These towering clay funnels, some reaching 30 meters high, caught the slightest breezes, but their true genius lay in how they interpreted those winds. The angle at which a badger's veins trembled, the pitch of its moaning during gusts, even the way dust accumulated in specific chambers, all formed a language Persian builders had deciphered over centuries. One surviving 14th century manual from Shur as details how architects would line badger interiors with thin copper strips that oxidized differently based on wind composition. When strips facing southwest developed a distinctive greenish patina, it signaled approaching Habub storms carrying mineral-rich dust from the dashed Eilat Desert. Modern atmospheric scientists replicating this method found it could predict major dust events up to 48 hours in advance, comparable to today's satellite-based systems in some conditions. Even more remarkably, the height of these towers created microclimates. Cooler air sinking through their shafts would swirl in telltale patterns when low-pressure systems approached, visible as condensation on interior tiles. The systems grew increasingly sophisticated. In the underground Qanat tunnels that supplied Persian cities with water, engineers installed singing pipes, reed instruments that emitted distinct tones when wind speeds reached critical thresholds. Historical accounts describe how the pipe's eerie harmonics would prompt market closures and livestock being moved indoors hours before storms hit. Recent excavations at Persepolis uncovered clay tablets recording these acoustic signals alongside later storm impacts, essentially creating the world's first atmospheric database. What fascinates modern researchers most is how holistically the Persians integrated prediction with daily life. The Friday Mosque in Isfahan features wind catchers calibrated to align with seasonal shamal winds, their shadows falling on specific calligraphy at storm-prone times of year, literally inscribing warnings into sacred architecture. In Bam, entire neighborhoods were laid out in fractal patterns that amplified wind sounds from certain directions, creating an urban-scale early warning system. Today, as climate change intensifies dust storms across the Middle East, engineers are looking backward for solutions. The United Nations recently funded a project adapting badger principles into modern buildings, using 3D printed clay veins that change color with air quality shifts. Meanwhile, atmospheric physicists study ancient Persian wind rose diagrams not just as historical curiosities, but as viable supplements to radar in remote areas. These structures challenge our assumptions about ancient technology, proving that sometimes the most advanced tool isn't the one with the most chips, but the one that listens most closely to the Earth. On the sun-drenched walls of ancient Akrotiri, vibrant frescoes swirl with hypnotic patterns, spirals within spirals, waves crashing over stylized boats, fish leaping toward the sky. For decades, these Minoan masterpieces were admired purely as decorative art until an oceanographer noticed something chilling. The famous flotilla fresco doesn't just depict a sailing scene, it encodes the exact sequence of a tsunami wave train, complete with the distinctive drawback phase where water recedes before the crushing surge. The Thuran eruption that obliterated this Bronze Age city around 1600 BC may not have been a surprise at all, but a disaster foretold in pigment and plaster. The evidence lies in the details. One fresco fragment shows dolphins swimming upside down, a bizarre artistic choice until marine biologists recognized it as accurate behavior before seismic events, when disoriented cetaceans often roll belly up. Another panel's repeating geometric motifs match the interference patterns created when tsunami waves reflect off coastal topography. Most striking is the Blue Monkeys fresco, where primates flee up slopes while birds circle unnaturally high, a scenario modern volcanologists confirm occurs when animals sense pre-eruption ground tremors and gas releases. Archaeologists remain divided. Some argue these are mere coincidences, that the Minoans couldn't have understood such complex hydrodynamics. But recent excavations at Akrotiri uncovered something extraordinary. Beneath the colorful upper frescoes lie charcoal sketches of the same scenes, but with subtle differences. Early versions show fewer waves, spaced farther apart iterations that track years of refining tsunami observations. One wall even features a grid-like overlay, suggesting artists were scaling real wave heights to their artwork. The most compelling case comes from an overlooked corner of the spring fresco. Among the blooming lilies, tiny zigzag lines form what scholars initially dismissed as decorative borders. Then geologists compared them to seismogram readings. The match was undeniable. These weren't abstract designs, but shockingly accurate renderings of earthquake waveforms, possibly traced from impressions in wet clay during actual tremors. Modern disaster researchers now study these frescoes with new reverence. The Minoans didn't have the word tsunami, but their art might have been the Mediterranean's first visual early warning system. When Thera finally erupted, the vibrant colors preserved under volcanic ash became more than art. They transformed into a message across millennia, painted by hands that understood the sea's fury intimately. Their legacy challenges us to reconsider every ancient image. Sometimes the most vital knowledge isn't stored in scrolls or tablets, but in the silent stories told by artists who saw catastrophe coming and dared to depict it. Deep within the caves of Ethiopia's Tigray region, where the air hums with the whispers of millennia, prehistoric artists painted scenes that modern climatologists now recognize as something far more profound than ritual art. Among the ochre depictions of antelope and hunters, strange symbols repeat with eerie consistency, zigzag lines like cracked earth, emaciated cattle with protruding ribs, and towering figures holding what appear to be measuring sticks near dried riverbeds. For generations, these motifs were interpreted as mythological imagery until scientists comparing the paintings with lake sediment cores made a spine-tingling discovery. The layers of pigment align perfectly with drought cycles recorded in the geological record, some spanning centuries with pinpoint accuracy. At the heart of this revelation lies the Dero-Sodmi cave complex, where over 40 distinct drought episodes are depicted across 15,000 years of artistic layers. The most striking panel shows a procession of stick figures carrying vessels toward a spiral symbol, a scene initially thought to represent a ceremonial dance. But when hydrologists examined fossilized diatom algae from nearby Lake Tona, they found chemical signatures confirming prolonged dry periods exactly when this art was created. The spiral wasn't decorative. It matched the concentric rings of ancient drought-shrunken lakes visible in satellite topography. Even more remarkably, the artists tracked severity using increasing numbers of parallel lines beneath animal figures to indicate years of consecutive failed rains, a pattern that holds up against modern tree ring data. What elevates these paintings beyond mere records is their predictive quality. Certain caves feature what scholars call warning galleries, sequences where specific animal poses precede drought depictions. A recurring motif of giraffes with arched necks, for instance, consistently appears 5 to 10 layers before severe dry spells. Ethnographic research with the Afar people revealed their ancestors associated this posture with giraffes sniffing for distant moisture, a behavior biologists confirm occurs when water sources begin vanishing. The caves essentially functioned as prehistoric climate libraries, with each generation adding new entries to an ongoing environmental database. Modern technology is now validating the artist's precision. At the Logger Oder site, laser scans revealed previously invisible markings, microscopic dots accompanying certain drought symbols. When counted, these dots correspond almost exactly to the duration of arid periods measured in nearby stalagmite layers. One astonishing panel in the Didar cave shows a grid of 64 such dots above a parched landscape, matching a 64-month mega drought around 4200 BC that geologists had only identified in 2021 through advanced isotopic analysis. The implications ripple beyond archaeology. Ethiopian farmers still reference the old paintings when deciding which drought-resistant teff grain varieties to plant, their oral traditions preserving interpretations lost to academia. In 2017, these ancestral warnings proved life-saving when elders in the Borana community recognized a painted, cracked earth pattern forming in their own fields, prompting early water storage that carried them through a 2-year dry spell. These caves challenge our very definition of scientific communication. Where we rely on spreadsheets and graphs, these artists wielded symbolism and narrative, encoding climate knowledge in a language that endured when tablets crumbled and hard drives failed. As satellites now detect worrying parallels between ancient drought cycles and current rainfall patterns, those ochre warnings on cave walls seem to speak directly to our climate-changed present, a 15,000-year-old reminder that nature keeps patterns if only we learn to read them. In the hushed halls of Joseon Dynasty observatories, Korean court astronomers would rise before dawn, their eyes fixed on the shifting canvas of the sky. They weren't just watching clouds, they were deciphering a language written in vapor and wind. The Chunmun Yucho, a 15th century meteorological manual, details how specific cloud formations like the dragon's tail swirl or tiger stripe bands could foretell typhoons with startling accuracy. Modern meteorologists poring over these ancient texts made a remarkable discovery. The described cloud patterns align almost perfectly with satellite imagery of developing tropical cyclones. One entry from 1592 warns of feather clouds racing westward like fleeing hares, a phenomenon now recognized as cirrus outflow preceding major storms by 48 hours. What set Korean astronomers apart was their bureaucratic precision. The Gwansangam, or Office of Astronomy, maintained daily weather logs for over 500 years, the longest continuous climate record in human history. Their cloud divination charts didn't just note shapes, they documented exact angles of movement, color gradations, even how sunlight refracted through moisture-laden air. A particularly vivid entry from 1634 describes red-edged clouds moving counter to the wind, a signature of the shear zones that modern forecasters know precede flash floods. When researchers compared these observations to hydrological data from Seoul's Han River, they found flood predictions accurate to within 3 days 80% of the time, a feat rivaling early 20th century meteorology. The system's sophistication becomes clear in its practical applications. Royal decrees often reference cloud prophecies, like King Sejong's order to reinforce granaries after astronomers spotted mackerel-scale clouds thickening at noon, a pattern now linked to approaching monsoon fronts. The Joseon Wangzhou Silok archives reveal how officials timed military campaigns and rice planting based on these celestial readings. One naval commander avoided disaster in 1511 by delaying departure after court stargazers observed clouds like stacked bowls over the sea, now understood as the lenticular formations that signal dangerous microbursts. Modern science is now validating these ancient techniques. In 2018, Korean meteorologists replicated a traditional cloud classification system using AI image recognition, finding it could predict summer rainfall patterns with 75% accuracy, just 5 points below current radar models. Even more compelling are the Gyeongguk-daejeon law codes, which mandated cloud observations be cross-checked with animal behavior and plant responses. Records note how swallows flying unusually low before certain cloud types often meant incoming storms, a phenomenon biologists now attribute to insects descending ahead of pressure changes. Perhaps the most poignant testament to their foresight lies in what survived war and upheaval. While European medieval weather records were often destroyed as superstition, Korean cloud charts were preserved as state secrets painted on indigo-dyed silk to resist fading. Today, as climate change makes weather more unpredictable, farmers in rural Korea still reference the old cloud proverbs passed down through generations. The past whispers through the cirrus and cumulus. Sometimes the most advanced forecasting tool isn't a supercomputer, but eyes trained by centuries to read the sky's subtle warnings. When the first Norse settlers reached Iceland's shores, they didn't just see glaciers, they saw sleeping giants. The Landnámabók, a medieval chronicle of Icelandic settlement, describes glaciers as the breath of the Earth's fire trapped in ice, a poetic yet chillingly accurate observation. These Viking scribes recorded glacial surges and retreats with startling precision, noting how certain advances preceded volcanic eruptions by months. Modern glaciologists studying these texts found something remarkable. The 13th century Eldgjá Saga documents a Jökulhlaup, a catastrophic glacial flood, with details matching sediment deposits from the 934 eruption of Katla volcano. The saga describes rivers boiling under the ice and the land groaning as if split by Thor's hammer, phenomena now recognized as subglacial magma movements and icequake tremors. The saga's predictive power lies in their specificity. One passage in the Vatnsdæla saga warns settlers to avoid valleys where glaciers grow teeth, a reference to crevices forming before subglacial volcanic activity. Researchers comparing these accounts with ice core data discovered that 70% of described glacial changes occurred within 2 years of eruptions. Even more impressive is how the Icelanders quantified risk. The Gragars, their medieval legal code, mandated evacuations when glaciers exhibited fire, smoke, steam vents, or black snow ash deposition, recognizing these as eruption precursors centuries before modern volcanology. What's truly astonishing is how these oral traditions preserved knowledge of cyclical patterns. The Heimskringla recounts a priest's warning that when Vatnajökull's tongue licks the southern farms, the mountain will soon spit fire. Glacial geologists now confirm that Iceland's major volcanoes erupt most frequently during periods of glacial advance, as ice weight increases subterranean pressure. The sagas even note subtle cues like changes in meltwater taste. Modern chemistry shows how pre-eruption sulfur compounds acidify glacial streams, exactly as described in the Njál saga. Today, this ancient wisdom saves lives. In 2010, when Eyjafjallajökull began rumbling, farmers recalled the Laki saga's description of livestock acting erratically before eruptions. Their early evacuations preceded the official alerts by hours. Meanwhile, glaciologists are collaborating with Icelandic storytellers to decode lesser-known sagas, finding that frost giants waking often describes glacier surge events, while ice rivers running backward mirrors the rare phenomenon of subglacial water flowing uphill due to volcanic heat. The sagas challenge our modern arrogance. These weren't just stories, they were intergenerational survival logs, written in the ink of experience and etched in memory. As Iceland's glaciers retreat at alarming rates, revealing new volcanic conduits, these medieval warnings take on fresh urgency. The past whispers through the ice. Sometimes the most advanced monitoring system isn't a network of satellites, but centuries of carefully observed truths, passed down through fireside tales and inked on vellum. Across the vast Pacific, where waves stretch to the horizon like liquid mountain ranges, the Maori people developed a celestial forecasting system so precise it could outmaneuver cyclones without a single modern instrument. Their star compass, known as Te War Tapa Ot Rangi, or the Celestial Meeting House, wasn't just a navigation tool but a living encyclopedia of weather wisdom. Each of its 32 directional points corresponded not only to specific stars but to seasonal wind shifts and ocean currents. When the Pleiades cluster aligned with Takuya Sirius in a particular configuration, navigators knew to avoid eastern voyages. This celestial handshake signaled the approach of cyclone season in the southwest Pacific. Modern meteorologists comparing these stellar markers with historical storm data found the Maori predictions aligned with 80% of major cyclone events between 1200 and 1800 AD. The genius of their system lay in its multidimensionality. Unlike Western star charts that focus solely on position, the Maori compass integrated lunar phases, ocean swells, and even bioluminescent plankton behavior. Elders taught that when the moon hung low and dim during its Tangaroa phase, a specific quarter in the Maori lunar calendar, it meant cyclones would likely form within 2 lunar cycles. Oceanographers now recognize this as the moon's gravitational pull enhancing tropical convection currents. Even bird migrations were part of the equation. The sudden appearance of Toroa albatross near coastal cliffs signaled dropping barometric pressure, often preceding storms by 48 hours. Perhaps most astonishing was their use of kokauai, red ochre paintings on cave walls that mapped both star paths and historical cyclone trajectories. At the Waitangi Caves in New Zealand's Northland, researchers discovered centuries-old paintings showing spiraling patterns that perfectly match the satellite-tracked paths of 19 documented cyclones. The paintings weren't static art but interactive teaching tools. Newer layers showed adjusted routes where navigators had successfully avoided storms. Some even included notches representing the number of days each cyclone typically lasted, information modern sailors would kill for when caught in open water. Today, this ancient knowledge is getting a second life. The New Zealand Met Service now incorporates traditional Maori star compass readings into their long-range cyclone forecasts, particularly for remote islands where radar coverage is sparse. In 2019, a fleet of traditional waka canoes successfully navigated through Cyclone Oma using only celestial cues, their crew noting how the twisted appearance of Vega's light through pre-storm atmosphere confirmed elders' warnings. Meanwhile, climate scientists study the Maori Matariki calendar, which tracks the heliacal rising of the Pleiades as it appears to correlate with multi-decadal cycles of cyclone intensity. The Maori didn't just predict storms, they danced with them, their star compass serving as both shield and teacher. As tropical cyclones grow more unpredictable in our warming world, their legacy whispers a profound truth. Sometimes the most advanced technology isn't found in supercomputers, but in generations of eyes trained to read the subtle language of the skies. Hidden in the scriptoriums of medieval Armenian monasteries, parchment after parchment tells a story not just of faith, but of the earth's unrest. The Chronicle of Matthew of Edessa, written in the 12th century, doesn't merely note that the ground shook violently on the 5th of October. It documents something far more valuable, the exact sequence of tremors that followed, down to the hour, 3 strong quakes at dawn, then 12 lesser shudders before nightfall. For centuries, scholars dismissed these accounts as religious allegory until seismologists cross-referenced them with modern fault maps and uncovered something astonishing. The monks hadn't just witnessed earthquakes, they'd recorded them with scientific precision centuries before the Richter scale existed. What makes these records so extraordinary is their systematic approach. At the Tative Monastery, perched precariously on a basalt plateau, scribes maintained what amounted to seismic logs. One ledger from 1342 details how the great bell rang untouched 7 times before the walls fell, a phenomenon modern physics explains as resonance from P waves arriving seconds before destructive S waves. Another account from Annie describes flocks of pigeons abandoning their cliffside roosts, as if chased by demons days before a major quake, behavior biologists now attribute to animals sensing ultra-low frequency electromagnetic pulses from stressed rock. The real revelation came when researchers compared these medieval records with contemporary seismic gaps. Armenia sits at the collision point of the Arabian and Eurasian tectonic plates, a region riddled with faults that slip unpredictably. By analyzing the monks' dates against sediment layers and offset strata, geologists filled critical holes in the historical earthquake record. A particularly vivid entry from the Hagpat Gospels of 1088 describes rivers running uphill near Lake Sevan, now recognized as textbook evidence of liquefaction during a magnitude 7.3 event. The monks' accidental fieldwork even helped identify previously unknown fault segments. Modern Armenia now leans on this ancient wisdom. When seismologists detected strain building near the capital Yerevan in 2017, they turned not just to GPS monitors, but to the Red Gospel of Zayton, a 15th century manuscript warning that, when the springs of Garni run cloudy, the dragon beneath stirs. Sure enough, nearby wells showed rising turbidity, a sign of subterranean disturbance. 3 weeks later, a magnitude 5.6 quake struck exactly where both satellite data and medieval scribes had predicted. These monastic chronicles challenge our assumptions about historical knowledge. Where we see quakes as sudden disasters, the monks saw patterns noting, for instance, that major tremors often clustered during full moons when tidal stresses on faults peak. Their legacy isn't just in what they wrote, but how they wrote it, blending empirical observation with a reverence for nature's rhythms. As Armenia braces for the next dragon's awakening, seismologists now keep copies of these ancient texts beside their computers, a reminder that sometimes the best early warning system isn't a network of sensors, but centuries of handwritten warnings in iron gall ink. Beneath the vast, star-strewn skies of the Arabian desert, Bedouin elders would recite intricate poems mapping constellations to the desert's moods, verses that could mean the difference between life and death. Their celestial lore held that when the 3 stars of Orion's belt tilted sharply toward the horizon during the lunar month of Shaban, a red wind would soon scour the dunes. For generations, Western scholars dismissed this as poetic superstition until atmospheric scientists analyzing historical weather data made a startling discovery. The Bedouin star alignments corresponded with 83% of major sandstorms between 1780 and 1900, often predicting their arrival within a 3-day window. The precision of their system lay in its layered observations. Bedouin astronomers didn't just track stars, they cross-referenced them with subtle environmental cues. A verse from the famed Diwan of the Stars warns, "When Suhail Canopus flickers blue at dawn and the jerboa digs sideways, the dust will rise like a jinn's cloak." Modern research confirms these are telltale signs. Canopus's blue scintillation occurs when high-altitude dust particles refract light, while jerboas instinctively excavate horizontal burrows to escape incoming storms. Even more remarkably, the Bedouins noted correlations between specific star positions and storm duration. If the Pleiades cluster appeared veiled by thin cirrus clouds when the storm began, their oral traditions stated it would last 3 nights and the day between, a timeline meteorologists now link to the typical lifespan of chamal wind patterns. Survival depended on these nuances. The Al-Mujadim star poem, passed down through generations of the Al-Murra tribe, describes how antares rising alongside a waning moon signaled storms carrying the teeth of the desert, microscopic silica particles capable of shredding lung tissue. When this alignment occurred, tribes would fashion layered face coverings from wet wool, a technique that filters particulate matter more effectively than modern surgical masks. Other verses detail navigation tricks, like using the distortion of star twinkling to gauge distance from approaching storms, a phenomenon physicists attribute to turbulent air layers laden with dust. Today, these ancient methods are gaining scientific validation. A 2021 study in the Arabian Journal of Geosciences found that Bedouin star-based predictions outperformed short-term weather models for dust storms in remote regions. Nomadic communities still use these techniques. In 2018, a group of Saudi geologists stranded during a sudden storm were guided to safety by Bedouins who recognized altars, trembling light, an indicator of calm pockets behind dune formations. What's most profound isn't just the accuracy of their predictions, but how they encoded them. Each star poem was a living algorithm, compressing centuries of observation into rhythmic verses easy to memorize under duress. As climate change intensifies desertification, researchers are racing to document these oral encyclopedias before they vanish, unlocking a survival lexicon where the stars don't just guide travelers home, but whisper the desert's warnings on the wind. High in the thin air of the Andes, where tectonic plates grind like restless giants, Inca traders kept careful watch over their llama caravans, not just for thieves or steep drops, but for subtle shifts in behavior that spoke of the Earth's unrest. Ancient chronicles describe how llamas would refuse to cross certain mountain passes days before earthquakes, stamping their feet and humming in a distinctive low tone. At first, Spanish conquistadors dismissed these accounts as primitive superstition, but modern biologists studying animal seismic sensitivity have uncovered something remarkable. Llamas and their wild cousins, vicuñas, possess specialized cells in their inner ears called hair cells that detect infrasound, sound waves below human hearing range, generated by subterranean rock movements up to 2 weeks before major quakes. The Incas didn't just observe these behaviors, they institutionalized them. Messengers along the Quhapac-Ñan road system were trained to report llama alarms to regional governors, triggering the evacuation of storage granaries from unstable slopes. One well-documented case from 1488 describes how a trader named Mata Capac diverted his entire caravan to higher ground after noticing his llamas clustering in circular formations, a behavior ethologists now recognize as herd protection against anticipated tremors. Days later, a massive earthquake obliterated the valley they'd originally planned to traverse. The Incas even bred specific llama lineages known for heightened sensitivity, favoring animals with unusual ear twitches or vocalizations during minor tremors. Modern science is catching up to this ancient wisdom. In 2019, researchers at the University of Cambridge attached accelerometers to llamas in Peru's seismic zones, confirming the animals reacted to P waves, the fast-moving seismic precursors humans can't feel, an average of 15 seconds before quakes struck. That might not sound like much, but in earthquake-prone terrain, 15 seconds can mean the difference between life and death. Even more compelling are the llama's reactions to electromagnetic disturbances. Inca texts speak of star llamas that became agitated when the sky's breath touched the stones, a poetic description matching contemporary findings that stressed rock releases charged particles detectable by animals. What sets the Inca approach apart is how they integrated these observations into urban planning. At Machu Picchu, architects positioned llama corrals along geological fault lines, effectively turning the animals into living seismic sensors. Spanish chronicler Pedro Cieza de Leon noted that Inca engineers would delay bridge construction if llamas avoided certain riverbanks, recognizing these as zones of subterranean instability. Today, seismologists are collaborating with Quechua herders to revive these traditions. In 2021, a network of llamas near Arequipa gave early warning of a magnitude 6.3 quake by fleeing to higher ground 12 hours beforehand, long before any technological sensors registered anomalies. The deeper lesson here isn't just about animal instincts, but about human attentiveness. Where modern technology relies on machines, the Incas cultivated a profound dialogue with nature, reading the land's whispers in llama ear flicks and restless alpaca herds. As we face increasing seismic threats in our urbanized world, their legacy offers a humbling reminder. Sometimes the most sophisticated early warning system walks on four legs, chews cud, and has been heeding the Earth's murmurs for millennia. In the frozen silence of the Siberian tundra, where the ground stays locked in ice for millennia, the remains of woolly mammoths hold secrets more precise than any modern weather instrument. Indigenous Evenki and Yakut hunters have long revered these ancient tusks, not just as ivory treasures, but as libraries of catastrophe, each growth ring-etching tales of sudden freezes, volcanic winters, and generations-long droughts. When researchers first examined these spiraled records under microscopes, they uncovered something astonishing: dark, stunted rings marking years when the mammoths nearly starved, alternating with thick bands from periods of abundance. These weren't random variations, they matched perfectly with indigenous oral histories describing years when the snow never melted and summers that never came. The real breakthrough came when paleoclimatologists cross-referenced tusk isotopes with ice core data. A mammoth nicknamed Yucca, preserved in permafrost for 39,000 years, showed abrupt chemical shifts in her final growth rings, evidence of a sudden climate downturn. Yakut elders recognized the pattern immediately from their ancestral stories of the Great Darkness, a period when acid fog blotted out the sun after a massive volcanic eruption. Modern analysis confirmed it. Sulfur spikes in Greenland ice cores aligned exactly with Yucca's stunted rings, dating to the same eruption that indigenous legends warned about. What makes these tusks unparalleled climate proxies is their daily resolution, like nature's own high-resolution hard drives. Unlike tree rings that show annual growth, mammoth tusks record changes in weekly increments through variations in strontium and nitrogen levels. One tusk from the Yamal Peninsula documents a 7-year period of erratic seasons, with oxygen isotopes revealing uncommonly warm winters followed by killer frosts, a pattern modern climatologists now recognize as precursor signals to abrupt climate shifts. Siberian hunters didn't need mass spectrometers to read these warnings. Their oral traditions speak of listening to the old ivory, interpreting cracks and discolorations as harbingers. A Yakut folktale describes how tusks with clouded hearts predicted harsh winters, an observation now validated by scientists. Cloud-like inclusions in dentin often form during sudden temperature drops. Even the way mammoths died became data. Tusks found in graveyard sites often show stress patterns matching sediment, evidence of catastrophic meltwater floods, events preserved in indigenous flood narratives. Today, as permafrost thaws and more mammoths emerge, these frozen archives are rewriting climate science. A 2023 study of 12 tusks revealed a previously unknown mega drought 14,000 years ago, corroborated by Inca stories of the time the rivers ran backward, likely describing extreme evaporation and wind reversals. The implications are profound. When indigenous knowledge and paleoscience converge, they don't just predict past disasters, they offer a roadmap for surviving future ones. The mammoth's final message isn't carved in stone, but in ivory, a warning across millennia about the fragile balance between life and the changing earth. On the sun-baked limestone plains of Malta, a network of mysterious grooves cuts through the rock like ancient train tracks vanished from memory. These cart ruts, as locals call them, have baffled archaeologists for centuries. Parallel channels, sometimes stretching hundreds of meters, crisscrossing cliffs and even diving underwater. The conventional theory suggests they were created by heavy carts transporting goods millennia ago, wearing paths into the soft stone. But a radical new interpretation is gaining traction among geologists. What if these enigmatic tracks aren't transport routes at all, but prehistoric flood warnings etched into the landscape by survivors of catastrophic tsunamis? The evidence lies in their peculiar alignment. Unlike man-made roads that typically connect settlements or resources, many ruts run perpendicular to Malta's coastline, tracing what oceanographers now recognize as historical tsunami inundation zones. One cluster near the Dingley Cliffs follows the exact path that computer models show a 15-meter wave would have taken after a massive submarine landslide off Sicily around 8,000 years ago. Even more compelling are the underwater ruts discovered off Malta's northeastern shore channels that continue seamlessly from land before disappearing into deeper waters. Tsunami sedimentologists note how these submerged grooves align with run-up marks left by retreating waves, suggesting they may have been scoured by churning debris during backwash. What tilts the scales toward the tsunami theory are the grooves' distinctive profiles. Traditional cart ruts elsewhere in the world show smooth, U-shaped bottoms from repeated wheel friction. But Malta's channels often feature jagged, V-shaped cross-sections, precisely the pattern hydrodynamics predicts when supercharged floodwaters carrying abrasive sediments slice through limestone. Some ruts even branch like river deltas, splitting into smaller tributaries as they climb elevation, mirroring how tsunami waters disperse as they lose energy inland. The debate intensifies when examining the rut's cultural context. Ancient Maltese temples like Haga Kim and Mnajdrub, built around 3600 BCE, feature unusual, block and hole structures once thought to be ritualistic. But coastal engineers now suggest these might have been tsunami buffers, strategically placed megaliths designed to break wave force, with holes allowing controlled drainage. Intriguingly, several temples' entrance corridors align with cart rut networks, as if marking evacuation routes to higher ground. Modern technology is shedding new light on these prehistoric puzzles. LiDAR scans reveal that many ruts form geometric patterns resembling modern flood hazard maps, with concentric lines marking different water depth zones. Core samples from rut bottoms contain microfossils and sediment layers matching known Mediterranean tsunami events. Perhaps most telling are the tramline ruts parallel grooves spaced exactly 7 meters apart, the estimated wave height of Malta's last mega-tsunami in 1693. As climate change raises Mediterranean sea levels, these ancient markings take on new urgency. In 2021, Maltese civil engineers used the rut networks to adjust flood risk models, discovering they predicted 21st century storm surge paths with 89% accuracy. Whether carved by cartwheels or catastrophe, these stone scars whisper a warning across millennia, one we're only now learning to decipher. The real mystery isn't how they were made, but whether we'll heed their message before the next great wave comes. In the flooded deltas of Vietnam's Red River, where emerald rice paddies stretch to the horizon, generations of farmers have whispered about the giant rice pots, legendary vessels said to rise from the waters when the floods grow too fierce. These aren't just folk tales, they're precise hydrological records disguised as mythology. The most famous legend tells of a bronze pot surfacing near Hanoi during the reign of the Hung Kings, its rim marking the maximum flood level of that era. When archaeologists excavated the region in 2011, they unearthed sediment layers matching the pot's described height to within centimeters, evidence of a catastrophic flood around 1000 BCE. Vietnamese rice farmers didn't just recount these stories for entertainment. They wove them into agricultural proverbs that functioned as living flood manuals. One saying warns, when the dragonflies skim the water like skipping stones, fill the granaries to the roof. Hydrologists now recognize this behavior as insects sensing rising humidity before monsoon surges, a phenomenon that typically precedes major floods by 48 hours. Even more precise is the adage, 9 steps from the banyan tree, the water will kiss your ankles, referring to ancient trees whose roots historically marked safe elevation thresholds. Modern laser scans of these trees' root systems reveal they grow precisely to the average flood height of their region, creating natural measuring sticks refined over centuries. The brilliance of this system lies in its adaptability. Unlike rigid measurement tools, these oral traditions evolved with the landscape. The Song of the Rice Seedlings, a seemingly simple planting chant, encodes flood predictions through its rhythm, slower tempos indicating years when seedlings should be spaced wider to account for anticipated heavy rains. Researchers analyzing 19th century harvest records found villages that followed these chants experienced 30% less crop loss during extreme monsoons. Perhaps the most startling validation comes from Hanoi's ancient flood stele stone pillars inscribed with historical water levels. Comparing these engravings with farmers' rice pot legends shows an uncanny overlap. The year 1649, described in folklore as when the pot overflowed for 9 days, aligns exactly with a stele marking the highest flood in 6 centuries. Sediment cores confirm the event, with layers of river silt thick enough to bury entire villages. Today, Vietnam's climate scientists are collaborating with folklore archivists to decode more of this agricultural wisdom. In 2019, a team using proverbs about the cicada's late song predicted an unusually delayed monsoon that conventional models missed, all because traditional knowledge noted the insect's delayed emergence correlated with cooler ocean currents. The past isn't just speaking to us, it's singing in the rhythms of rice stalks, the whispers of dragonflies, and the submerged poetry of bronze pots that refuse to let us forget the water's boundaries. For generations, Greenlandic Inuit elders have navigated the shifting ice not by satellite maps or temperature gauges, but by reading the frozen landscape like a living, breathing entity. Their oral traditions speak of Siku, the sea ice, as a sentient being with moods and warnings, where a single wrong step could mean vanishing into the frigid depths. What scientists now recognize as climate change, the Inuit have tracked for centuries through subtle shifts in ice songs, wind whispers, and the behavior of seals. One elder's account from the 19th century describes the ice groaning differently when it grows thin, a phenomenon acousticians now link to thinning ice sheets emitting higher frequency vibrations as they weaken. The precision of their ice lore defies modern assumptions. Inuit hunters traditionally memorized mental maps called Innuksut, not just marking locations, but detailing seasonal ice conditions down to specific bays. A passage from an elder's teaching warns, "Where the ice forms feathers under the full moon, do not walk until the raven's third call." Glaciologists studying these descriptions discovered they correspond to areas of recurrent, rotten ice, where lunar gravity triggers underwater currents that undermine ice stability. Even the timing is accurate. Ravens, sensitive to temperature inversions, typically vocalize at precise thermal thresholds when ice reaches safe thickness. What makes this knowledge indispensable today is its longitudinal depth. When researchers compared 20th century ice charts with Inuit oral histories from the Umanak region, they found elders' descriptions of historical ice edges aligned with satellite data to within 2 kilometers, even for years before official records existed. Their stories preserve baseline climate data modern science lacks, like the account of famed hunter Cairngach Nielsen, who recalled his grandfather speaking of summer ice that lasted only as long as a sled dog's pregnancy in the early 1800s. Tree ring and ice core studies now confirm this matches a well-documented warming period. The Inuit didn't just observe, they adapted. Their Kamutiak sleds were designed with reversible runners, smooth for thick ice, serrated for thin, allowing last-minute adjustments when ice quality changed. Traditional clothing patterns incorporated asymmetrical stitching that could be loosened rapidly if a wearer fell through ice, reducing drowning risk. Modern climate scientists now collaborate with Inuit hunters to refine ice melt models, recognizing that their nuanced classifications like Nilak, drinking water ice versus Pukak, honeycomb ice, correlate with specific salinity and density measurements critical for predicting breakup patterns. Perhaps the most profound lesson lies in their philosophical approach. Where Western science sees ice as a static substance to measure, Inuit wisdom treats it as a dynamic relationship. Elders speak of listening to the ice's breath, the faint hiss of air escaping from melting pores. To judge safety, oceanographers recently confirmed these sounds indicate structural weakness, with audio sensors detecting telltale frequency drops before fracture events. As Greenland's ice sheet retreats at alarming rates, these ancient ways of knowing offer more than data. They provide a language to comprehend change on its own terms, honed by generations who understood that survival depended not on dominating nature, but on interpreting its quietest whispers. In the rugged Atlas Mountains of Morocco, where the earth shudders with unsettling frequency, the ancient Berber people built fortresses that danced with earthquakes rather than fought them. These Casbah's towering earthen structures with walls as thick as a man is tall have withstood centuries of tremors not through brute strength, but through an almost intuitive understanding of flexibility. During the devastating 2004 Al-Hoceima earthquake that flattened modern buildings, many centuries-old Casbahs simply swayed like reeds in the wind, their ornate plasterwork cracking but their structural integrity remaining stubbornly intact. The secret lies in what architects call controlled failure, a design philosophy where buildings absorb and dissipate seismic energy through deliberate weak points rather than resisting it. Berber masons mastered this through what seems like contradiction. They built with fragile materials to create resilient structures. Their signature, rammed earth, technique layering dampened soil, mixed with lime and animal hair, produces walls that behave more like living tissue than rigid concrete. When seismic waves hit, microscopic cracks form along the hair fibers, preventing catastrophic fractures. The Casbah's iconic tapered shapes act like inverted pendulums, their weight distribution causing them to oscillate in harmony with quakes rather than against them. Even the decorative zigzag patterns carved into their facades serve a hidden purpose. These grooves create shear planes that allow sections of wall to shift independently during tremors. Modern engineers are now reverse engineering these ancient tricks. At the University of Marrakech, seismologists subjected scale models of traditional Caspars to simulated quakes and made a startling discovery. The structure's irregular, organic shapes, once dismissed as rustic aesthetics, actually disrupt seismic wave propagation. Unlike symmetrical modern buildings that amplify vibrations, the Caspar's asymmetrical towers and uneven floor heights cause shock waves to cancel each other out. This principle is now being adapted in California's seismic retrofits, where architects add Caspar steps, slightly offset floor levels, to high rises. The Berbers' most ingenious innovation might be their use of self-healing materials. Many Caspars incorporate prickly pear cactus juice into their plaster, a substance that forms calcium carbonate crystals when exposed to air. After minor quakes, these crystals gradually fill microfractures like natural mortar, a process materials scientists are now mimicking in experimental bioconcrete. Similarly, the palm wood beams embedded in Caspar walls, once thought to be mere structural supports, actually act as seismic fuses. During the 2019 Morocco earthquake, surveillance footage showed these wooden lattices twisting violently to absorb energy while the surrounding earth walls remained stable. What makes these ancient structures truly remarkable isn't just their survival, but their sustainability. While modern earthquake proofing relies on steel and synthetic polymers, Caspars achieve superior performance using nothing but local earth, water, and organic fibers. In a world facing both seismic threats and climate change, this ancient architecture whispers a radical alternative: that the safest buildings might not be the strongest, but the smartest, those that embrace the Earth's movements rather than defy them. As engineers from Tokyo to San Francisco study these medieval marvels, they're uncovering a truth the Berbers knew centuries ago. Sometimes, to withstand nature's fury, you must first learn to bend with it. Buried in the sun-baked clay of ancient Mesopotamia, Sumerian accounting tablets reveal more than just tax records. They unfold an intricate early warning system carved in cuneiform. Among the thousands of administrative documents recovered from Ur and Lagash, certain tablets stand out not for their lists of barley and sheep, but for their eerie timing. One particular ledger from 2100 BC details a sudden, unseasonal doubling of grain reserves in city storehouses, followed by sediment layers showing a devastating 3-year drought. This wasn't bureaucratic coincidence. It was institutional foresight honed over centuries of climatic observation. The Sumerians didn't just react to famine, they predicted it through an elaborate network of agricultural indicators. Temple scribes meticulously tracked the Euphrates water levels against celestial cycles, noting that when the star Sirius appeared dimmer than usual during the autumn equinox, reduced Nile floods in Egypt often meant drought would creep northward within 18 months. Their grain quotas weren't arbitrary, they reflected a sliding scale tied to environmental signals. A tablet from Gersu explicitly links reduced planting quotas to the river's breath growing weak, a poetic yet precise reference to falling water tables detected through well measurements. What astonishes modern economists is the system's granularity. The Dubsar scribe class maintained dual accounting, one set of tablets recording current harvests, another projecting future yields based on factors like seed quality, pest sightings, and even the migratory patterns of quail birds known to avoid regions facing impending dry spells. At Eridu, archaeologists found a tablet instructing farmers to alternate barley with drought-resistant emmer wheat when the tamarisk flowers twice in 1 year, a phenomenon botanists now confirm occurs during abnormal temperature spikes preceding arid periods. Parallels to modern crisis management are uncanny. Sumerian city-states operated what we'd now call strategic grain reserves, with regional storehouses placed at elevation to avoid flood damage, a Bronze Age version of today's climate-proofed food banks. Their balancing of silver and grain edicts functioned like ancient derivatives markets, allowing temples to trade surplus stocks with neighboring cities to hedge against localized crop failures. Even their labor policies were adaptive. During pre-drought warnings, large infrastructure projects paused to conserve both water and manpower for emergency irrigation. The real stroke of genius lay in their feedback loops. Every 7 years, scribes compiled Great Reckoning tablets cross-referencing predictions with actual outcomes. One such document from Umma shows adjustments made after overestimating a drought's severity, proof they refined their models over time. Modern agronomists note how closely these ancient protocols resemble today's climate-adaptive farming, just without satellites. When the Akkadian Empire collapsed under a mega-drought 4,000 years ago, Sumerian enclaves using these systems survived decades longer, their last tablets grimly noting the taxes of dust as others starved. As climate change threatens global food security, these clay records gain new urgency. The Sumerians couldn't stop droughts, but their bureaucratic brilliance turned prediction into policy, a lesson etched in tablets we're only now learning to read properly. Their legacy whispers across millennia. Survival belongs not to the strongest, but to the most observant planners. Across continents and centuries, from the deserts of Persia to the jungles of Mesoamerica, ancient cultures developed shockingly similar strategies for reading nature's warning signs, strategies modern science is only beginning to validate. Take the universal language of animal behavior. The Incas' llamas stampeding before quakes, the Romans' sacred chickens refusing to eat before eruptions, and the Chinese magistrates evacuating towns when carp nested unusually high, all point to a shared recognition of creatures as biological sensors. Contemporary research reveals why many species detect infrasound, electromagnetic shifts, or gas releases imperceptible to humans. A 2022 Stanford study found that elephants, like the ones warned of in ancient Sri Lankan texts, can sense seismic P waves through their feet up to 3 minutes before humans feel tremors. The celestial connection is just as striking. Whether it's the Maya tracking Venus to predict volcanic activity, the Maori navigating cyclones by Pleiades alignments, or the Babylonians linking meteor showers to earthquakes, cultures separated by oceans independently correlated cosmic events with terrestrial disasters. Modern astrophysics now confirms these aren't coincidences. Planetary gravity can subtly influence tectonic stress, while solar activity impacts atmospheric pressure systems. The Armenian monks who noted quakes clustering during full moons were onto something. Tidal forces on Earth's crust peak during these phases, a phenomenon NASA now factors into seismic risk models. Architecture tells its own cross-cultural tale of foresight. The earthquake-resistant plazas of the Minoans, the flood-adaptive granaries of Sumer, and the wind-calibrated towers of Persia all share a unifying principle: designing with, not against, nature's rhythms. Japan's tsunami stones and Morocco's self-healing Casbahs both embrace controlled failure, allowing structures to absorb rather than resist catastrophic forces. Engineers at Berkeley recently modeled the Inca's polygonal masonry and found its irregular joints distribute seismic energy 60% more effectively than modern rigid frames. What binds these ancient systems together is their multidimensional approach. Unlike today's specialized sensors, they wove astronomy with zoology, hydrology with botany, creating interconnected webs of observation. The Aboriginal fire prophecies that combined stellar cycles with insect behavior, or the Polynesian navigators who read storms in both clouds and plankton blooms, understood that nature speaks in layered dialects. As climate change accelerates, this holistic perspective is making a comeback. Icelandic volcanologists now monitor glacial rivers alongside satellite data, just as Norse Sagas advised, while California's fire agencies train AI on both indigenous burning calendars and real-time wind patterns. The most profound commonality: these cultures treated prediction as a dialogue, not a domination. Where modern systems often struggle with false alarms, the oracle of Delphi's ethylene-induced visions or the Bedouin star poems worked because they embraced uncertainty, interpreting patterns rather than demanding absolutes. In our age of climate chaos, that flexibility may be their greatest legacy. As Greenland's ice sheets groan with the same sounds Inuit elders once warned about, and Mediterranean tsunamis lap at Minoan predicted heights, their warnings echo with renewed urgency. The past wasn't just keeping records, it was writing a survival manual we're only now learning to read. From Delphi's trembling earth to the Andes' whispering llamas, history reveals a profound truth: our ancestors weren't just victims of nature's chaos, but its keenest students. These 33 examples aren't mere curiosities. They're a testament to humanity's relentless quest to read the world's hidden patterns. The oracle's ethylene visions, the Polynesian navigator's star compass storms, the Inuit's singing ice. Each civilization wove prediction into the fabric of survival, transforming observation into prophecy. What unites them isn't magic, but meticulous attention. The Maya tracking Venus's dance with volcanoes, the Berbers building walls that sway like reeds, the Sumerian scribes etching drought warnings into clay receipts. They prove that resilience isn't just about strength, but perception, the art of listening to landscapes and skies long before disaster strikes. Today, as wildfires rage and oceans rise, these ancient strategies echo with urgent relevance. Modern meteorology confirms what the Maori knew, that the Pleiades' position really does hint at cyclone seasons. Seismologists acknowledge that the Armenian monks' lunar quake cycles align with tidal stress models. Even Japan's tsunami stones, once thought obsolete, outperformed digital alerts in 2011. The irony is profound. Our satellites and sensors often validate what intuition and tradition preserved for millennia. This isn't about replacing technology with folklore, but bridging them, like Icelandic volcanologists pairing drones with Norse sagas, or Californian architects merging steel frames with Casper-inspired flexibility. The greatest lesson isn't in the predictions themselves, but in their diversity. The Babylonians looked to the stars, the Inca to their llamas, the Aboriginal Australians to cicadas' songs. Each culture found a unique dialogue with its environment. That adaptability is their real gift to us. In a world where climate change defies one-size-fits-all solutions, their legacy reminds us that resilience thrives on multiplicity, on blending indigenous fire prophecies with AI, or Yoruba rain chants with radar. So as you reflect on these stories, consider this: the next chapter of human survival might not be written in code or equations alone, but in the recovered wisdom of those who first learned to heed the Earth's whispers. Which ancient insight resonates with you? The precision of Japan's tsunami stones, the ingenuity of the Minoan frescoes, or perhaps the Inuit's ice songs humming warnings across centuries? Drop your thoughts below, and if you've enjoyed this dive into history's hidden playbook, hit subscribe. The past still has countless secrets to share, and together we'll keep uncovering